Hello, and welcome to Ladies of Lore, the podcast where we take all of the most wonderful women of mythology and folklore from all over the world and we unpick, unravel, and explore their origins, their stories, and how they've changed through time to arrive in today's modern world. I'm India, and I am so grateful to have you here with me today. If you're new to the podcast, welcome on in. I really hope you love it here. And if you do, please feel free to follow or subscribe on your favourite podcast platform. And if you really love it, you can always leave me a little review or a comment if your platform allows it. Now, I'm aware I've been a little bit quiet because life's been lifing. I'm in the penultimate year of my degree now, so my assignments are getting very longer, and I've been, trying to put the graft in there, trying. And I don't like to bring you guys anything that's like half done. We want to be fully cooked when I give it to you. So I apologise. I've missed a little bit of time, but I promise it is for good reason. And especially good reason today, actually, because I'm not on my own today. I'm not. I'm actually joined by some very special guests today to talk about some of the real life women of ancient Rome. Yes, I have with me Matthew and Matteo, the father and son hosts of the Lost Roman Heroes podcast, which was actually recently named a must listen history podcast by Amazon Music and one of the best ancient history podcasts in Find That Pod, which is that's pretty cool actually. So hello to Matthew and Matteo.
Hello.
Hello, India. We
Hello.
are excited to be here with you today.
Thank you for having
Oh,
us.
thank you so much for joining me today. It is genuinely so lovely to have you here. It's fantastic. It has taken a little bit of logistical planning to get us all together, which I'm not going to lie, partly made worse by me being absolutely atrocious at responding to emails. But I am really grateful to you both for reaching out and for coming onto the show today and all of the work that you've put in. So I'm really excited to hear what you have to say. What I thought we'd do is start off by giving you guys the floor for a couple of minutes just to tell us a little bit about yourselves and about your wonderful podcast before we jump into the world of ancient Roman women.
That sounds perfect. So, Lost Roman Heroes podcast is something that my son Matteo and I started nearly 2 years ago now.
Mm.
Almost three, no?
No, it'll be 2 years in August, I
Oh,
believe.
Oh,
And
I think it's the same as me then. I think you could have been the
really?
same. Oh yeah, we
oh, nice.
probably share a
Twins,
birthday.
birthday
Yeah,
twins.
twinny.
so, my son, I mean, the basic origin of this podcast is we've been having a long running conversation since shortly after Matteo's birth about about ancient Rome, but more importantly, not the grand figures, but the ones that slipped through the cracks and that
Mm,
nonetheless had an incredibly impactful life
That's right.
and without whom the course of history might look very different.
That's right.
mhm.
And that's kind of where it started. And, for the first 500 years of Roman history, it struck us that we were just talking about old guys, old rich guys. So it's definitely a privilege for us to be on this podcast, and we're here to talk about something new.
Yeah, it. We were just having a conversation, which I probably haven't put into the episode, but we were just literally having a conversation about women, weren't we? And how, history is very much written by men, for men, about men, putting men
That's
maybe on a
right.
bit of a pedestal. Um, and I think you guys sort of said that it's been interesting to see how hard it is to actually find information out about women for
Yeah,
that
even,
reason.
in ancient Rome, affluent women were very influential,
Mm.
and the
Hmm.
historians almost downplay their position in common Roman society, um,
Mm.
because a rich woman in Rome was certainly as powerful as a rich man. So
Hmm.
it's just interesting to see how often they're written out of the histories.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're written out of the history or woven into the history in remarkably unflattering ways.
Yes,
Uh,
that's yeah, yeah.
they're in Roman history. There seem to be three kind of classical characters. One is the matron, the
Hmm.
ideal Roman wife. She spins wool. She stays
Virtuous.
home, virtuous, raises children, dies quietly,
Hmm.
and and then you have sort of the Vestal Virgin type uh, character, which is sacred and untouchable. Her power comes from her purity. She's basically a nun.
Yeah.
So you have mom, you have the nun, and then you have the adulteress. You know, the spicy
Hmm.
one,
The
the
Lady
one
of the
that,
Night,
yeah, that's,
Yes. Yeah, ruining
which
lives.
obviously
yes, ruining
is
lives,
very intertwined
poisoning.
with the history of Rome itself, right? Romulus and Remus, they were
Yeah.
raised famously by a she-wolf, which we believe to interpret a lady of the night, possibly. So
Yeah,
Hmm. Yeah, and that kind of is a bit reminiscent of the three main archetypes you see in mythology for women, which is maiden, mother, and crone. It's
right.
very it's very similar to that, you know, and those figures in a way they sort of represent the different stages of women's lives. Um, so it's interesting that that does translate into history as well, because I think often when we talk about mythology or folklore, it's easy to have a degree of separation between that and history, but actually, it's very reflective of the world within which it was written. Um, and then that's just one example of that.
couldn't agree more.
But most definitely. And what's fascinating about the three women that we're going to talk about today is somehow, inexplicably, they were able to break the mold,
Mm.
right? My
Hmm.
son, they just can't be so neatly.
Diminished.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Yeah.
And especially a few of the people we will talk about had nasty slander, like
Mm.
horrible propaganda slander campaigns against them. And
Most definitely.
I think that ultimately their actions in life outshowed uh, all the slander.
Yeah. No, great. No, thank you so much for you know for doing all of the work and putting all the research in to bring this to us. I'm really genuinely looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Before we officially kick it all off, I will be putting all of the links to the Lost Roman Heroes website, podcast, all of your social media in the episode description, so you can find out even more. And there are tons of excellent episodes to listen to. So I really genuinely would encourage all of you to head over there and get some lovely context, because we love context over here, that will really help you to understand the real world attached to some of the ladies of law that we talk about over here. So, as I said, for today's episode, I asked Matthew and Matteo to pick some of their favourite female figures from ancient Rome to tell us about, and they have chosen impeccably. So I'm just, yeah, like I say, very excited to hear all about it. So if you guys are ready, please introduce your first ancient Roman woman and tell us all about her.
The first one, India, is a woman by the name of Galla Placidia, and we're very excited to be revisiting her because we've sort of felt that we gave her short shrift on the
Mm,
episode that we did on her.
Yeah, to understand her impactfulness in her era, I think you have to understand the context and sort of what happens following her death. But she was definitely a bright ember in an empire that was just burning to the ground.
That
So
that's well put. So Galla Placidia, her name means peaceful Galla, and she was born around 392 A.D. She was the daughter of an extraordinary man known as Theodosius the Great. He was the last emperor to rule a united Roman Empire. That is, he ruled over both East and West. After his death, the empire will split permanently and will never reunite. So, on her father's side, Galla Placidia has the Theodosian dynasty. On her mother's side, she is a member of the Valentinian dynasty. So she carries two extraordinary imperial bloodlines that unite in her. She's as Roman gets. But she was born into this privileged world, India, but the privilege and the peace that she knew upon birth didn't last for very long. Her mom died in childbirth, bringing her into the world, and her father died when she was only 3 years old. So she was
oh, wow.
orphaned at the age of 3, never knew her parents. At
Ah,
which
okay.
point, she's placed into the household of the most powerful man in the Western Empire, a general by the name of Stilicho.
he was kind of like her scheming uncle, uh, that also is not from Rome.
Mm.
Uh, so she was definitely placed in a precarious situation. And who was in charge of the two empires? It was her two brothers.
Yeah. Yeah, who are sort of nincompoops, and we'll get to them in a second. But
What a great word. I love that
uh,
word.
it was so she was raised in the household of this barbarian general Stilicho, who was loyal to her dead father, and her surrogate mother was a woman by the name of Serena, who is the niece of Theodosius himself. So technically, she's being raised by family, and she's betrothed at a very early age to Stilicho's son, a fellow by the name of Eucharius. So this little orphan girl has no control over her own destiny, and she's just thrust into this. I would actually, it's not even in the limelight, sort of in the shadows. She's kept almost like a hostage in the imperial palace.
And this probably, I think, it's also important to note that this might be more of a new trend within Roman society in the upper echelon, ever since more of the top percentile started converting to Christianity. Because in the old pagan Rome, uh, I think women were definitely um, much more liberated.
More. I would agree with you. They were more liberated and visible.
Yeah.
There's no doubt. I think that's a good point. You're starting to slip very slowly into more of a medieval and Christian world. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, Christianity has a habit of doing that. I think that's very if pretty much any episode, pretty much all of my episodes, it it starts with perhaps there being a little bit more autonomy for women, and then Christianity comes in and says, no, 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 you can't have that anymore. So it's really interesting that that translates into this as well, into ancient Rome.
Yeah, and we're witnessing that transformation right now. So
Mm.
indeed. So she's growing up. We know little about her early teenage years, and then the wheels start coming off the Western Empire. Stilicho, her surrogate father, is accused of treason, executed in 408 by her own brother Honorius, and Placidia then does something truly remarkable. She appears again in the spotlight when she's 16 years old, standing before the Roman Senate. Rome is under siege at this point by Alaric, who is kind of king of the Goths, and Serena, the woman who raised her, really the only mother she ever knew, has at this point been accused of conspiring with Alaric, the enemy literally outside the gates. And the Senate turns to Galla Placidia and says, "What's your opinion?" And we have this great quote from a historian called Zosimus, which is, "The Senate condemned Serena to death. Even Galla Placidia, who had been brought up by Serena, did not oppose her execution, but rather seemed to agree with it." Which is, it gives me chills when I say it. So you get this kind of Game of Thrones moment where this little girl that everybody has sort of been writing off as a non-entity shows how ferocious she was and what she was capable of doing in order to survive.
Yeah, it's very much survival instinct, isn't it?
Most definitely.
oh
And
yeah, I mean,
she is a survivor, like quintessential survivor. In 410 AD, so shortly thereafter, Alaric actually does sack Rome. So this is the first of the sacks of Rome. Rome hadn't been sacked for, Matteo, like 800 years, something along those
that's
lines.
right.
And on his way out, India, he's leaving Rome. He's passing through the Aurelian walls. His army is burdened with loot, but the prize jewel that he takes with him is actually Galla Placidia. She's now a hostage of the king of the Goths, and she's around 17 years old. She's now living in a barbarian army camp, marching across Italy into Gaul, and from there into Spain, whereupon Alaric dies, and his brother Ataulf succeeds him.
And this is kind of why we were bringing up Game of Thrones earlier before, because she's almost like a Cersei Lannister,
Yeah?
or not Cersei. Who's the queen of Westeros? What was her name? Daenerys.
Oh,
Sorry.
yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Daenerys, yeah.
because even though Galla Placidia has been taken prisoner at this stage in her life, this is almost like the first time she's had any agency over herself. So, um, you know, Ataulf, the successor of Alaric in 1414 AD, actually ends up falling in love with Galla Placidia.
And they get married. They have a spectacular Roman-style wedding in the city of Narbonne in southern Gaul. 50 young men are dressed in silk, each carrying gold and precious gems as gifts from the Gothic king to his Roman bride. I love what Matteo just said because it's true. It's the first time that this young woman has had an opportunity. We're assuming that this was of choice, but we think it was. It seemed actually to be
A
a love
happy
match
marriage.
and a happy
Yeah,
marriage.
I was literally going to ask you that. Do we know? Do we know if that was something that she was agreeing to, whether she had, she reciprocated those feelings? But it sounds to me like that may have been the case, which is surprising, really, isn't it? You don't expect that to be the
That's
case,
right. I
but
mean, she
yeah.
had the imperial glory or the imperial blood, and now she had an army at her back, which is definitely not something you would see in ancient Rome. So
And so she's now a Roman princess, and she is queen of the Visigoths, which is absolutely extraordinary, kind of nuts.
Mm.
And this Atolf character embraced her Romanness and wanted to bring it to his Goths. So I, it seems that it was like a vehicle
she
or a
was his
vessel for
suzerain
her.
almost,
Yeah,
although they're like married.
yeah.
It was under the umbrella of Rome, which, I mean, if this marriage hadn't happened, Alaric would be, or Atolf would be another wandering barbarian
Just another
burning
brute.
the
Mm.
countryside. So
And you're right. Now he's been elevated. Before he wanted to destroy what was left of Rome and in Gaul after marrying Galla Placidia, he changes his mind and wants to be seen as Rome's protector rather than its conqueror. She changed his entire vision of what
Wow.
the world could be, which I think is also somehow, while it's not explicitly stated, an indication that he was enchanted by her,
definitely,
and that it was a partnership and hopefully a love match.
definitely.
So now she has a son with him and names the son Theodosius after the father she never knew. Unfortunately, the boy dies in infancy, and then Ataulf is assassinated around 415. So again, her life is plunged into absolute turmoil. She has these little glimpses of joy and harmony and tranquility, but they don't last for very
Mm.
long. Um, the new Gothic king is a fellow named Sigeric, who takes Galla Placidia, Roman princess, Gothic queen, publicly humiliates her, forces her to walk miles on foot in the dust among ordinary captives. She is shamed. Um,
Which it's important to mention. In the ancient Roman stories, those women that do get shamed, like we said, the Vestal Virgin, they're
yeah.
expected to basically kill themselves
Yes.
in
Mm.
order to retain their
I love
dignity.
that. Yes. Yeah. There is no recovering from something like this for anyone other than Galla Placidia because
Otherwise, yeah, it's like a death sentence almost to your
yes, you're
family,
absolutely
your
right.
name.
But she outlasts India everyone. She has this resilience and persistence and tenacity. 7 days later, her captor, Sigeric, is murdered by his own men, and the next Goth king hands Galla Placidia back to her brother Honorius in Rome. Back to Rome you go.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So,
Gosh.
time to take a breather, a
Yeah.
little holiday? Not really, because her brother, who we have nothing but contempt for, forces his sister to marry his general Constantius. So the love of her life is murdered. She's been shamed. Her son is dead. She's sent back to Rome and immediately forced to marry General Constantius, a man that she did not want. And we have another good quote from an ancient historian, Olympiodorus, saying, though unwilling, Placidia was compelled by her brother Honorius to marry Constantius, whom she did not desire. Poor thing.
Yeah. It's been rough. It's been a rough ride.
Rough.
Yeah, it would make a good TV show up to this point.
Yes. You know
Yeah.
what? It would make a fantastic TV show. So they have two children, a daughter named Honoria, remember that name, and a son named Valentinian, who is also pretty much worthless. Constantius, her husband, dies in 421 uh, after having been elevated to the purple, so she is now a Roman empress. Honorius, her brother, dies in 423, and all of a sudden, Galla Placidia is not just the most important woman in the Western Empire, she is the most important person. She is on top of the pile, ruling in her son's name. And he's only 6 years old.
Which also oftentimes doesn't happen. Not many times were there child emperors in Rome,
Yes.
and at that, it was, the mother oftentimes did not share that kind of power. So I think it just goes to show more the importance of and how capable she was in
Yes.
this time,
And she was not in the shadows. She was right there, center stage.
sitting on the throne.
And remarkably enough, she is only 37 years old at this point. So let's think about that for
Younger
a
than
second.
Julius Caesar before he ever accomplished anything.
You're right. She was orphaned at 3, kidnapped at 17, a barbarian queen at 26, empress at 33, widow and regent at 37. I don't think anyone in the history of Rome has lived this life.
It's a lot of
Ye-
life, isn't it, to have lived
Yes.
37 years? That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. And I also don't think any other person in history would hold those 3 titles of Roman princess, Gothic queen, Roman empress.
Yeah,
My
I
son,
also think that was
right?
just her.
So, anyways, as regent, she handles everything India. She is functioning as the emperor, in fact. She chooses popes, she mediates disputes, she passes laws, she builds churches. In Ravenna, you can see an extraordinary building known as Galla Placidia's Mausoleum that she had built, even though she wasn't actually buried in it. It has extraordinary mosaics, and it's very much worth a visit. So at this point, she starts to fade a little bit from the history. We don't know a lot about the balance of her life, but we do know her last act of power is something truly extraordinary. In the year 450, that daughter of hers we mentioned, Honoria, writes a secret little letter to Attila the Hun. That's right. Her daughter writes to Attila
Wow.
because Galla Placidia wants to marry her daughter to some senator, and like the good teenager that Honoria was, she was going to have none of it. And so she thought she would bring in a little rebellion. The little rebellion invited Attila the Hun into the Western Empire. At this point, Attila had just been bugging the Eastern Roman Empire, and the letter was the perfect excuse he needed to invade the West, which has kind of accelerated the steady decline. Galla Placidia intervenes and saves, because her son Valentinian wanted to have his sister executed when he learned of the letter. Galla Placidia protected her. At the age of 62, she passed away in the city of Rome on November 27th of 450 AD. And that is Galla Placidia.
And it's a little sad that we didn't get to know more specifically of what actually happened under her quote-unquote reign. They wouldn't categorize it as that, but we would. But it was probably the last few years of relative peace before the undoing of it all. So
Yeah, most definitely. The Western Empire would have 26 years left after her passing. Had she lived longer, maybe she could have chartered a different path. She was the only one capable of kind of holding it all together. And after her death, there was kind of no turning back.
that's right.
So,
Wow, and that is one very, very complex story, isn't it? It's it's fascinating. Something you just said there, just right at the end, about if she had have lived. Isn't it really fascinating to just hypothesize what that might have looked like if she had have lived longer? That's
Certainly.
yeah. Oh gosh. And what really strikes me about her story is how she moves between worlds, right? So she moves between this Roman world and this Gothic world, and yet somehow she manages to retain that power, to hold on to it. And I
Yeah,
think,
it's.
yeah, Kerry, please go.
Oh, I'm sorry to cut you off. I don't
That's
want
okay.
to.
No, you're fine. No, you please do jump in wherever you want.
It's because, in our opinion, she was destined. She was the
Mm.
daughter of the Theodosian dynasty and the Valentinian dynasty. She was destined for greatness, like her father had achieved, her grandfather. And her brothers, like we said, completely incompetent. Those guys were just tarnished the family name. But you could definitely see where all the genes went to because
Yeah.
she had an incredible story, and she had this ability to survive and like you said, to rise to the top of wherever she found herself. So
and India, there's one thing that we didn't highlight enough in her story, which is her brother, her sons, they were all kind of non-entities, but she had an extraordinary cast of characters beneath her. Her generals were some of the most exceptional, powerful, pig-headed Roman military leaders in the history of Rome. For example, Aetius, who was the fellow that would stop Attila at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains just a year after her death.
Who also spent years as a hostage like her, actually.
That's also true.
Oh,
And she
okay.
was able to control these competing generals, prevent them from rising to the purple themselves. She strode not just an ability to resist and survive and a resilience, but an extraordinary will and mind that allowed her to not be controlled, but rather to control
And there were no
these.
plots against her,
Yep, that is also true. No plots against her. Yeah.
no civil wars, no rebellions. I mean,
That's really interesting to think about because it seems very commonplace for those things to happen, and for it not to have the absence of that, I think is really striking. Um, and what you said there about her, who she surrounded herself with, was that something that she was in control of? So she sort of handpicked these people, or were they already sort of there and she was able to sort of step in and able to manage and control them
well, we
during
think
the day?
that I would say Anissa Juliana had the ability to rein in all these great people because,
Galla Placidia.
sorry, Gallipolysidia, because a lot of these figures shortly after her death would end up all going to war against each other and end up, themselves killed shortly after. So,
Mm,
she was able to, like my dad said, maintain these few decades of stability, whereas the whole world was on fire. I mean,
It
it's
is
hard to
true.
downplay uh, the destruction happening around them. So, she had the ability and the acumen to win the respect of these men, and they knew who they served, I think.
yeah, and what I said about sort of her being able to move between these two worlds and retain the power. I think from a mythology perspective, I think that in itself feels almost mythological. Because she's a bit of a what I would probably call a liminal woman. In that respect,
What do you
in
mean by that?
in that she sort of occupies this space between worlds. So
Yes.
when we talk of like liminality, it's that threshold, and that can come in loads of different forms. So you have women of mythology and folklore who occupy that space between seasons or between moon cycles and all sorts. But this is sort of like the history version of that. It's that space straddling the line between this Roman world and the Gothic world. And to talk about some mythological figures that also do that, you've got people like Persephone. She's moving between two worlds,
Hmm.
and in doing so, gaining a kind of authority that comes from having a dual identity, because that's what it is, isn't it? She's got this dual identity um, in both worlds. And I think another thing that's really interesting to me is just how she's remembered um, as sort of pious and politically effective. And I always wonder how much of that is really carefully constructed by the sources that we have, and that goes back to
That's
what
right.
we were talking about. About who's written that, why have they
Cur-
written that, who's the audience.
Curtailed imagery. It's it's education almost like.
Yeah,
Um,
and yeah, I think that's something that for anyone who's interested in history and mythology and in folklore, I think it's always worth turning yourself into a bit of a detective when you read things and really looking at everything through the most critical lens that you can and
Agreed.
ask yourself questions. Like when you're reading this extract from whatever source, from contemporary source, who's written it? Why are they writing this? What's the aim? Who's supposed to be reading this thing? Um, and that I think is a more interesting way to read history because you start becoming, like I say, a little bit of a of a detective yourself, and it adds a lot of layers. And I think rather than just reading this text, you're really interrogating it and thinking about it and why might that have happened and how has that affected that person's imagery, persona, and reception from at the time and all the way through to today.
Agreed, and I think we have also the most egregious example to talk about today. So we're gonna definitely touch on that more.
Oh, I look forward to hearing it. And there's also something. like very compelling, I think, about her as this survival figure. Because again, in mythology, there's a really strong motif of women who begin as captives or of outsiders and then gain influences within the systems that they're brought into. And I think she fits this pattern very, very well because she's captured, displaced, remarried, and all the other stuff that happens, and she still ends up ruling, which is just like
That's right.
insane.
She ends up on top of
It's
the throne.
insane. It
Yeah.
really is. It's insane, and it's a story that is
Should be a
not
book or a
told.
show.
Yeah, no,
It,
it's not. Yeah, it would be. It would be a great show. It should be. It should
It
be.
would. Agreed.
I think it's just such a powerful narrative arc, isn't it? And it echoes figures like Andromache, again displaced by
Od-
conflict, rebuilding identity and influence within.
Odysseus too, almost like
Yeah,
an
yeah,
Odyssey.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it's being displaced, but being able to, as a survivor, rebuild and gain influence and gain power within completely new structures. And when you think about women like Briseis, for instance, she's a captive woman, but her impact is essential, and her personal story becomes something a lot bigger. And I think that's just a really wonderful sort of motif that you find in mythology and is obviously echoed in history as well.
Agreed.
And I think it's she's framed, like I said, as being sort of politically active and pious and so many different things. And I think again this touches on something we spoke about. Women can often be sanctified or feared, and that is all depending on how their power is perceived.
That's right.
Yeah,
A competent woman is more often than not portrayed as a wicked or a cruel lady.
Yep.
You know.
but
yeah,
somehow Galla Placidia managed to be both. And
yeah.
to close out her little chapter, there's one last quote that Matteo will read, which was a panegyric composed during her life or shortly thereafter, which is remarkable.
O noble mother of princess, guardian of Rome, whose wisdom upheld a crumbling world.
That was a historian known by the name of Merobodes, or Merobodes. I'm sure I'm butchering his name. But I guess the point is that even in life, she was regarded extraordinarily well.
It's the balance that upheld the empire.
Yeah, which is unusual because it
Yeah.
doesn't fit neatly into any of those archetypes that we talked about before.
And even when it does, it's still, it's very difficult to put the responsibilities of an entire empire on one person, whoever
Yes.
they may be.
Yes.
Absolutely. Okay, well, thank you so much for all of that. I did have a couple of questions. We've kind of covered them already. So I'll ask you one. And that is that the marriage to Ataulf,
Hmm.
was that marriage viewed as political strategy at the time? Or was it a bit scandalous? Do we
No,
know?
I actually think it was viewed as political
Mm,
strategy, and her brother consented nominally. He had no objection to it.
mm.
The brother, the Honorius, that was ruling from Ravenna, I think they viewed it as a plus, bringing the Goths closer into the Roman orbit. And Honorius needed Goth arms. He
And
needed
less enemies.
people to fight, and he needed less enemies. So I
So,
think he was the Roman world was for this. I'm sure there was certainly a degree of scandal, but we'll see more and more of these breaking of historical taboos as we move forward in the timeline.
yeah, definitely.
And just to wrap that one up, I think what's so compelling about Galla Placidia is that she does embody transition, and not just personally, but historically, because she's living through this transformation of the Roman world, as well as her own personal transitions. And her story, I think it almost becomes a bit of a lens for that shift, which is something that we often see in myth as well. So that was such a lovely little insight into her. And I think now is probably a good time to talk about your next figure. So I'll hand the floor back over to you.
That's all right.
Thank you, India. Our next figure is a woman by the name of Anicia Juliana, and she was born around 463 A.D. in Constantinople, so about 13 years after the death of Galla Placidia. She was born into what was the most prestigious family in the entire Roman world, and one of its most ancient, a family known as the Anicji. Now, India, this is a family so old they can trace their bloodline back to the Second Punic War. We're talking about the war between Scipio and Hannibal, and that is 650 years or so in the past. So when we say blue blood, the blood doesn't get any bluer than what was coursing through her veins. And by the way, she carries more than just the Anicji name. Her father was a Western Roman emperor known by the name of Olybrius. Didn't rule for long, didn't rule particularly well, but he was an emperor. Her mother was Placidia the Younger, who was a distant relative of Galla Placidia herself. So running through her veins is the Anicji legacy as well as the imperial Theodosian and Valentinian bloodlines. She is as royal as you get, and she's effectively the last surviving member of 3 ancient Roman dynasties. She's the last of the Mohicans, truly, of the ancient Roman imperial and republican tradition. So when this young lady walked down the street in Constantinople, everyone knew. This wasn't a secret. Everyone knew. There she goes.
She wouldn't walk down the street. She would
Of
be
course,
carried on a
yes.
chair.
Yeah, fair enough.
By many
She's not
servants.
walking anywhere. Yes,
Yeah.
for sure. She is that person. And yet, we know little about her childhood. She was raised by 2 empresses. So she was raised in an extraordinary household. Her father, she really never knew. When she was a very young girl, he left for the West to rule in the West and would die in the West. And this extraordinary woman, even a woman of this stature, which is something really remarkable, and it makes me sad when I think about it, is treated as a bargaining chip. This is a woman that can point to multiple emperors in her past. She is fabulously wealthy and powerful. And when she is just a teen, the Eastern Roman Emperor Zeno decides, you know what, Juliana, I need you as a bargaining chip. You're going to marry Theodoric the Amal, who was a Gothic king. And as far as we know, her opinion wasn't asked. She was simply offered, like chattel.
By someone who also is not even the patriarch of her own family. It's just, the president of your country.
It's decided. Yeah.
Yeah, you're going to do this.
Yeah.
The most blue-blooded, powerful woman in the Roman world offered like a trinket to a Gothic warlord. And that's the reality of being a woman, even at the very top. So, for whatever reason, she did not wind up marrying Theodoric, who would go on to become Theodoric the Great and who would rule Italy in the emperor's name. She remains in Constantinople in a period of violent transition. The old Roman aristocracy is dying, India. There are little vestiges, little whispers, hints, and threads left, but they're fraying quickly. And we're transitioning to a new Christian imperial order and an imperial order which is run by new men, new money, people that right were thrust into power.
Clergy.
Clergy or brutes that could wield a sword.
That's right. Gone were the days of high education and going to school for 18 years.
Yes.
Before actually stepping out into the larger world.
And this is the period, the rise of the Justinian dynasty, Justin and his extraordinary nephew Justinian. And so what does Anicia Juliana do? She fights back with the only weapons available to her: gold, connections, and an extraordinary brain. So first the brain, because this part really astonishes me, and Matteo and I spent a lot of time talking about this. In the early 6th century, there's a schism in Christianity between the the Pope in Rome, who was really just
the bishop
of Rome, and the Bishop of Constantinople, who was known as the Patriarch. This is an annoying little technical schism that we don't need to talk about. It was known as the Acacian Schism. And basically for 35 years, the Eastern and Western churches were fighting over the nature of Christ. And you had this huge open wound at exactly the time that Rome needed to be united, because the West was quickly falling away. And nobody could bring the two sides back together again. The emperor tried, and to no avail. Senators tried to no avail. And then Anicia, Juliana, picks up a pen, this private noblewoman, and she writes a letter to Pope Hormisdas in Rome, basically asking him to heal the breach on behalf of Rome. And actually, we have a little snippet from the letter. It opens with her saying to the Pope,
To the most blessed and apostolic Lord, Pope Hormisdas, Juliana humbly greets you in Christ.
and she closes the letter saying to him,
May the Lord of all, through your holy prayers, establish the peace of the churches and strengthen the bond of charity.
So this letter exists in the Vatican archives, and let's think about how extraordinary this is. This is not an empress. It's certainly not an emperor. It's not a general. This is a Roman princess taking it upon herself to write a letter in Constantinople to the Pope in Rome to heal the Roman world.
It's pretty bold.
1,500 years ago, and we still have it.
Yeah, yeah, it's truly extraordinary. So there's a little hint of her genius, and here's another one. So she built a masterpiece in Constantinople, and you can see little bits of it still in Istanbul. There's an active archaeological dig on the site. What she built right next to the palace in which she grew up was the Church of St. Paleuktus, which was built in Constantinople sometime in the early 520s. It was designed to be larger than any church that any emperor had ever built, right? She did this to make a statement saying, the world that I represent, the old world, we still exist and we're still relevant. And there was an inscription carved on the entrance that said the following. My son, would you read that?
The Empress Eudokia was the first to build a temple to the holy martyr Polyectos, but now Juliana, proud of her imperial lineage, has increased the size and beauty of the work, surpassing even the wisdom of Solomon himself.
Surpassing Solomon. This is not a mousy little princess confined to her tower. This is a powerful
And
woman.
she has many statements to make, I think.
Without a doubt. And this thing was truly extraordinary. The walls were covered in marble and glittering mosaics. Precious stones were set into columns. And the ceiling, the ceiling was literally covered with the gold of the Anicia. So this is at the point where Justinian is emperor, and he is requisitioning money from all the great families to help fund his grand dreams to retake the West. So he comes to Juliana and basically says, fork over the family loot. Your emperor needs you. Juliana stalls for time, appearing to consider his request, and then she does something extraordinary.
After stalling for time, she had her gold melted down and fashioned into plates, with which she adorned the ceiling of the church of St. Polyectes, thus preserving it from the emperor's avarice.
In other words, she took all the family gold, melted it down into gold plates, and put it in the ceiling of this extraordinary new basilica she built so that the emperor could never have it.
Yep,
That is, do you know what? I'm going to use a really basic modern term. That is iconic. That is like, that is like, that is such a move.
That's right.
It's
It
like,
is.
it's wild. It's very clever.
Against a man who was brilliant himself.
Yeah,
you know?
extraordinarily clever, because
Outplayed him.
as much as it would have frustrated and infuriated him, he would not dare touch the church.
That is probably one of the cleverest things I've ever heard.
House
Genuinely,
4D chess.
it's
That's right.
absolutely crazy.
So you can just imagine Justinian, the most powerful man
Fuming.
on the planet, standing beneath that glittering golden ceiling, seething inside,
Yeah.
knowing that that gold is out of reach, it's been given to God forever. Well, the truth is, it was given to God until the Fourth Crusade, and the Venetians would strip the gold from that ceiling and take it back to Venice, unfortunately. But extraordinary.
Very much so. That's really fascinated me. I'm gonna absolutely have to go and look at this up a little bit further. A question for you guys though: are there any sources to talk about reactions to this? Are there any? Do we know how people reacted to this on both sides of it?
Unfortunately, very, very little. We get
Ah,
little. Anicia Juliana is one of those s- captivating figures that we can't see directly. You'll get glimpses of her through the corner of your eye
mm,
in history. So,
But we do know for sure that it was one of the largest church in the city. It was like revolutionary, almost the grandeur and the stature of what she built. And you know, I think it definitely was personal to Justinian,
most
because
definitely.
not long later he would go and build the Hagia Sophia, which still stands today.
Yep.
And it definitely feels like he was trying to one up her, like it was a personal thing.
Yep.
So
There's no doubt about it. And she represented everything that Justinian was not. She was the old blood, old aristocracy, going back
Latin,
to the days of the Republic, Latin bloodlines. Justinian was a farm boy married to uh, an actress. He was knew she was ancient, and but unfortunately, no, we don't know much about the reaction on the street. But to
and maybe
Mateo's
that was
point,
done by design.
I think is very good. She would die in 527. In 532, the Nika riots break out. The center of Constantinople is burnt to the ground, giving Justinian the opportunity to rebuild the Church of the Holy Wisdom that stands today in Istanbul, and he deliberately made it more extraordinary, more lavish, larger than St. Palaeoctus. Yeah.
do you know what? When you've just told me this story, it's like it's made me like jaw dropping. It's like such an interesting, fascinating story, and like a real example of a woman being cunning and smart and outplaying a man. And
That's right.
you know, and the reason I asked about reactions is because to me, why wouldn't why wouldn't this be recorded? Because it seems like a pretty big thing,
Oh
you
yeah.
know. And I think it just goes to show that I wonder if a man had done this and not a woman, how would that have been written? Would
Oh,
we all know about it? Probably.
that man might be dead.
He
I
he
mean,
might well be. Mateo's point, I think, is valid. He
Yeah.
probably wouldn't have survived the
Oh
insult to
yeah,
the emperor.
yeah, yeah. True. But it's just interesting to know that this has happened and it's been done by a woman, and you sort of think to yourself, well, I feel like more people should know about this story.
It's
agreed.
you know what? It's more people should know about her.
Yeah.
It almost it hurts that she is that sh I mean, if you try to look for a book, if you go to Amazon and type in Anicia Juliana, good luck. There's really nothing. You can, however, get a little glimpse of the woman. We think there is a bust in the Metropolitan Museum of Fine Art in New York that is believed to be Anicia Juliana, and she was beautiful. She was
Definitely
really
regal.
regal, yes, extraordinary. She was the last. Her home in Constantinople, her salon, was where all the last little threads of ancient Rome would gather uh, in organized, if quiet and nonviolent resistance.
And she was definitely a huge political player who was
Yes.
funding multiple PACs and stuff like that. So,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, I don't know how it would work in
Yeah,
ancient Rome, but
yeah. She had extraordinary influence, but Justinian was
the
masterful in making certain that history was written in a manner that was favorable to him,
yeah,
and
that's definitely his greatest achievement is the amount of centralization and conquest of information that he was able to
yeah.
achieve. You know,
And to the extent that there were things written about him, I have no doubt that he had a hand in making certain that those things were erased and didn't live
recorded.
to see the light of day. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what really stands out to me about her is how intentional she seems in sort of trying to shape her own legacy. Um, she's trying to sort of actively construct how she's going to be seen and remembered, and I
That's
think
right.
it's really fascinating that in doing this, her influence perhaps comes more through art, um, and obviously this construction of this ceiling than direct rule. It's a I don't know, I guess it's a quieter form of power, but it's
Yes.
arguably just as lasting, if not even more so, long lasting.
Agreed. And there's one last before closing out. There's one last little physical bit remnant you can see of Saint Palaeoctus and of Anicia Juliana if you have the privilege of going to visit Venice. Sitting in front of Saint Mark's Basilica are two columns that the Venetians took from Saint Palaeoctus in the Fourth Crusade and brought back with them, still standing, and they're quite extraordinary.
I mean, it'd be really cool if you guys have some images that you'd like me to put in the show notes, or links to images that people can see, any things that are associated with these women, or even
Most
any
certainly.
reading that you can suggest. I know obviously you said that there's not a lot, but if there is anything about any of this that you think is worth people listening to or reading, just pop it over to me so I can put it in the show notes as well.
Perfect. We'll do
Absolutely.
so.
Great. And I think with this particular figure, and I've sort of already said it just makes me wonder how much of what we see here is deliberate self-fashioning. Um, whether she's consciously curating all of these things just to sort of try and decide how future generations would understand her. Um, and I think it's a really interesting contrast to Galla Placidia, because Galla Placidia's power, in my sort of interpretation of it, comes through survival and adaptation. Whereas here it feels a little bit more like control and legacy.
Yeah,
Don't know if
almost
anyone
like
would
she
agree.
wants to immortalize herself.
Yeah,
And it's interesting to see her colleagues over in Rome at the time, because there was still plenty of blue-blooded Roman families, but they were kind of just withering away amongst their own bickering and and issues. So it's pretty interesting to see that uh, in this era of destruction or of change, like you said, transition. She definitely has many statements to make, and they're intentional. And she talks about herself in a way that's glorifying. So
Yeah.
it's nice to see.
Yeah, I think she was very aware of who she was and what she represented, and she was determined that the world remember.
yeah, yeah. You can tell that. You can really tell that by the things that she did. If I was to try and make a mythology comparison, I think I'd probably maybe throw out some figures a bit like Hera. I think she almost has that Hera-like quality, sort of this very deliberate projection of status and authority through how she's presented. And I think what's really fascinating about her is that she doesn't just live within history. She's not just part of it. She's curating it, which is what we've just sort of said. And I think that feels really close to mythology, because you often find in mythology figures aren't just remembered and just sort of you know have accounts written about what they did. They're more so shaped into something a bit more enduring and a bit more
Mm.
symbolic.
That's right.
Yeah. And of course, I do have a little question for you guys, um, if you don't mind. Um, and that is, do you know how unusual it was for a woman to be depicted in the way that she has been throughout ancient Rome? I mean, because it seems to me like she's, like I said, more of it's more of a almost a bit more of like an artistic preservation of her, rather than sort of like I said, Galla Placidia. So when you look at these women who have potentially some status and power in ancient Rome, are more of them like Galla Placidia, or are more of them like this one?
Well, I wouldn't say that they're like Anicia Juliana or Galla Placidia, because I
Mm,
don't want to take away from the actual
mm,
people they were. I think they were exceptional and more than just,
yeah,
lucky. So, but I would say that um, for women in this time, if you're an aristocrat in Rome, you would preserve yourself through art, I think, and
yeah,
you would commission seminaries to be built, or what's the word? Where do abbots go? Abbeys?
Convent?
Yeah, covenants. Sorry. And women were definitely um, the big force that were putting money into the empire, where the emperor was oftentimes draining the coffers.
But one of the things I find interesting about, and I find her fascinating to begin with, but that there is, while there's not much written about her, to my knowledge, there's nothing negative written about her, right? There are no character assassination,
That's right. Which in this
no
time period was
accusations,
super prevalent.
which is really remarkable. So to some extent, though, it's what I was saying earlier. You can't look directly at her; you can only see her through the corner of your eye. But the absence of the negative stuff, I think, is also a testament to her. She must have
Yeah,
been truly remarkable.
sometimes, a lot can be said by what's not there rather
Yes.
than what is there, for sure.
That's right. And
Okay.
we'll
Okay,
see
please
that
carry
again
on.
right now. Well, like we said, we have this egregiousness that we want to confront. So the next person that we're going to talk about is Theodora, um,
Hmm.
who was empress and who was born in 497 and lived up to 548. She was married to Justinian, and she was definitely a colleague and contemporary of Anicia Juliana.
And as different a human being and an upbringing and education as you could possibly be, and yet at the end of the day, I think they had much in common, perhaps,
I
or
agree.
more than you would think. So we have a great amount of material written about Theodora from contemporary historians. None of it is particularly kind, and this is she really got a raw deal
Yeah.
in the ancient historical sources.
And it's honestly, it's I think I definitely believed the narrative for a long time as well, and she's portrayed in a way that's very unbecoming of her, and it's definitive. There's no
Yeah.
room for argument, or it. That's how she was. So, we talked recently with a professor that actually wrote a book on Justinian, and
Yeah, Dr.
Justinian and
David Parnell.
Theodora, and
Yeah.
he definitely helped open our perspective up.
So most of what we know about the Empress Theodora comes to us by a historian known as Procopius, who wrote a number of books, some publicly released where she was praised, and then he wrote something known as The Secret History, where she is revealed to be a monster, a prostitute who seduced Justinian and corrupted the moral fiber of the
Course.
empire. Yeah. He goes all out. It's really something quite remarkable. And that was a book published posthumously. And we did a whole episode on Procopius digging into this. But the short version is that Procopius wrote this political hack job and kind of kept it in his back pocket as a weapon. At any rate, what do we know about Theodora? She was born around 497 AD. Her father was a bear keeper in the Hippodrome of Constantinople. Dad died when she was just a child. Her mom brought the girls into the Hippodrome as performers, and back in the ancient world, to be an actress was the lowest form, the lowest rung of the social scale, and there was really no clean lines between being an actress and being a prostitute in the Roman world. And actually, Roman law barred actresses from marrying senators, which is pretty remarkable. So she is the lowest of the low class in a deeply hierarchical world. She was the mistress of some minor Roman official, was taken to Egypt, broke up with a Roman official, worked her way back to Constantinople, and somewhere in somebody's living room she meets a young man named Justinian. Actually, his name at the time was Petrus Sabatius. He would change his name later. This guy was the nephew of the reigning emperor at the time, who was known as Justin I. And Justinian was like 15 years older, I think, Matteo, than her,
Yep.
15, 20, falls head over heels madly in love with her. He pushes through a change in the Roman law, India, to allow him to marry an actress. That's love.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And in 525, they marry. 2 years later, Justinian becomes emperor, and this former actress / prostitute is empress of the Roman Empire. And this is, as Matteo said, contemporaries with Anicia Juliana, not long after her death. And it's just an indication of how quickly the world is changing. She went from being the bearkeeper's daughter to the Empress of Rome in short order.
And I think Anicia Juliana might have been mortified.
She she might have been, yes, mortified, but then I think when she sees what Theodora would do, Theodora was not just a pretty face, and she was stunningly beautiful. She pushed her husband, who was going through a huge reform of Roman law, recodifying 1,000 years of Roman law. He pushed her to do things like to pass a law regarding women banning the trafficking of young girls. She pushed him to reform divorce law to protect women financially. She established shelters for women fleeing forced prostitution. She gave mothers more rights over their own children and women the right to inherit property in their own name. This is crazy stuff.
Yeah, that's a bit of a breakthrough, really, because it's giving women, daughters, and wives, and ex-wives, real social power. Wealth being able to continue through a daughter. Wives being able to claim property if their husbands died. That sort of stuff is massive. That's massive. Especially, at that time, you would sort of assume that
Definitely.
was just not a thing.
Super ahead of her time. I mean,
Super ahead of her
Yeah.
time. And you know what? We need to give a little tip of the hat to Justinian as well, because he before they married, I neglected to say this, he endowed her with an extraordinary treasure, basically, so that she could come to the marriage as an equal and didn't feel like she needed to depend upon him for monies. And so he was also an extraordinary guy in that sense, and he was completely amenable to making these changes to Roman law. He understood the plight of women thanks to her. And then in 532 AD, there's this cataclysmic event in Constantinople known as the Nika Revolt. Justinian and Theodora are this is a full-scale urban uprising. Half of the city of Constantinople is on fire. People are trying to dislodge Theodora
Justinian.
and Justinian from power, and Justinian is prepared to flee. He's packing his bags. He is ready to flee in the middle of the night, to cross the Bosphorus, to save his own skin. And envision this meeting, India, with Justinian and his top generals and all the senior officials in the palace, and they're talking about running away. And Theodora, who was not invited to the meeting, walks into the room and gives one of the most extraordinary speeches of all times.
If flight were the only means of safety, yet I should disdain to fly. Those who have worn the crown should never survive its loss. Never will I see the day when I am not saluted as empress. If you wish to fly, Caesar, you have the means. Yonder is the sea, and those are your ships. But I shall stay. I hold with the ancient saying that the purple is the noblest shroud.
So, it's okay, husband. I understand you're afraid. If you want to run, run. Nobody's going to stop you.
But I will die here.
I will
with
die
your
here,
empire.
and I will die on my throne in the purple.
Mic drop.
My drive,
That's
exactly.
right. And all the generals were looking around.
Like,
Exactly.
The room
Yeah.
got quiet.
Yeah, needless to say,
Yeah.
Justinian decided not to run.
Yeah, I feel like if you've sort of like rewritten law so you can marry somebody, you probably owe it to them to stay.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's
if they're
right.
not going to run.
Yeah, so stay he did. Uh,
And it changed his life forever.
changed his life forever in the course of human history. That speech changed the course of human history.
That's right.
Had Justinian fled, the dynasty collapses. The great reconquest of the West that he would engineer would never happen.
And maybe within 150 years, there's no Rome.
It may well be. And one of his seminal achievements is the Corpus Juris Civilis, which is this cleaned up, recodified body of Roman law. That thing would go on to form the foundation of essentially every legal system in the Western world today. And had he not survived, had he not stayed, that would never have been created.
Exactly.
So, anyways,
It
one
kind of
one woman.
highlights, yeah, and it highlights, we don't, because of how history is written, and this is something we've said time and time again, even in this conversation, because of the way history is written, who it's written by, which is largely men, um, you you lose this sort of sense of the importance of women, and in this story alone, if you take her out of it, if you take Theodora away and she wasn't ever there, history's completely different. Things are
That's right.
completely different. And that just shows how much power and influence women have had in history and have always had in history. And that's not
That's
just in
right.
ancient Rome, that's everywhere, everywhere you go. In all time periods, in all countries, you know, a lot of the things that have happened probably because of a woman somewhere somewhere down the
Yes.
line, or her influence or a relationship or her her sense of survival and power. But because of the way things are written, we do lose that sense. And what you've just said there is really, that really highlights that.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the narrative oftentimes is curtailed and it's
Mm.
presented to you in the way that it should be received. But it's important to remember that this was the world the same way it is today. And there was millions of people, men, women, that were just, living their lives. So it's preposterous to say that history is just a lineage of great men. I mean, I think that's ridiculous. So
And
we're happy to be able to talk about this.
we are. And one of the great things about Theodora is that Justinian publicly recognized how extraordinary she was, how brilliant she was. They were true partners and on the throne. And
And if anything, she had more qualities and personality that would outshine Justinian.
by the way,
He was
you're
more
right.
reliant on her than she was on him.
Yeah, I think that's very well put, and you're absolutely right. And perhaps the greatest testament to her, India, is that she would die, unfortunately, young in 548 of what was probably cancer, with Justinian by her side. Justinian would live for another 27 years,
Never
would
remarry.
never remarry, never, to our knowledge, had a mistress or a girlfriend, or he was true to the memory of his beloved Theodora,
And
which
those were
is
the last of his greatest years as well.
yeah,
After that
yeah, that's true.
would be the slow,
Slow
um,
decline. Yeah.
And
yeah,
that's
to
quite
his reign.
unusual, isn't it, for especially for men in such elevated positions of power, to not have any other kind of relationship again for that number of years. That is testament to the impact that she's obviously had on him, and
That's right.
the love that they shared. I think as well, because so many historical women were forced into marriages, or had arranged marriages, or were you know kidnapped and made to have relationships with men. Sometimes we do forget that people did actually love each other sometimes.
Yeah,
That's right.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
it is nice to hear of a story. I use the word nice very loosely. Obviously, there's lots of other stuff going on. To hear about a story where there probably was quite a lot of love. There clearly was, because from what you said and what I've read about, and I'll talk on that more in a sec. Um, he had every reason not to not to marry her. The law
Mm-hmm.
was prohibiting it. Her reputation, her past
It was
career,
political
I suppose.
suicide for him.
Yeah, yeah, but he's chosen it anyway, and he's rearranged laws for her, and they've had this, what sounds like to be a beautiful partnership. And I think it is nice to sometimes hear about a love story, um, where that's two people choosing each other and trying to make a difference in the world, which sounds like that's what this
From
is.
from two different worlds as well. It's like
Yeah,
Romeo and Juliet almost. Like, um,
Yeah.
it's a bit romantic actually,
It is.
which is nice.
It is a very much a romantic story, and there are many ways you could criticize Justinian, um, but this is perhaps his most redeeming, the most redeeming aspect of his story
yeah,
is
definitely. He, even he was very meticulous and very calculated, but he had the capacity to love,
yeah,
and I think that was brought out by Theodora, who also had a great capacity to love and
well
to
put.
care.
Oh, excellent. I mean, I think what I find like so striking about Theodora is how extreme the narratives around her seem to be. And I didn't want to do too much research for this going in, um, because I wanted to hear it from you guys. But when I did do my research on Theodora, I it was very evident very quickly that she's either elevated or demonized, and in the extreme. And that feels very in line with how powerful women are, um, treated in mythology. So I did get some quotes about her from Secret History, which
Hmm.
just really just hilarious. Um, she's described as Theodora from the brothel, which
Yes.
I, I'm like that in itself is just defamatory straight away. Um, and I don't know, you guys have probably read these things, but she's described as allowing geese to peck grain from her lower torso,
Yes.
dancing naked but for a ribbon, and also things like saying that she regrets that God gave her only three orifices for pleasure.
That's
She's
right.
described as being vulgar, jealous, filled with insatiable lust, as well as possessing cold blooded self interest, shrewishness, and mean spiritedness. That is absolutely horrible. That's really horrible. That's like
Yeah,
It,
horrible.
Procopius goes to try to portray her as almost a literal demon, like a
yes.
sycophant,
Yeah.
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
just the incarnation of sin. So
He is not held
it's
back.
N-
definitely not. And
no,
luckily, sorry.
it's hard. No, it's horrible. The geese. You can't make that stuff up. But Procopius was he had some real issues. He just
Yeah.
he had some real issues because
Yeah.
not only does he destroy her and defames her in every way possible, but he does the same to Justinian, and he does the same to his hero, mentor, friend,
And his
uh,
wife as well.
uh, Belisarius, General Belisarius, and Belisarius's wife, Antonina, who was actually very dear friends with Theodora. So, but yes, the things he says are,
And
Yeah. Yeah.
luckily, the Secret Histories wasn't released right following his death, but they would be unearthed a few centuries later,
yes,
and would become like a great drama in Europe, and all the medieval elites would eat that kind of content. So it's a little sad to see how she got portrayed later on in history.
yes,
Um,
It's yeah, it's crazy. I think like you said, I think he did. He had some issues. In my head, I just like to just picture him writing this, um, and it kind of it to me in my head. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the movie Mean Girls, but it feels to me like when they're writing in the in the burn book in Mean Girls, just really angrily writing all these horrible things about people. And it's just crazy that probably to some people this account of who this person was and who all of the people that he described was just taken as fact.
Certainly, he was a great and respected historian at the time. So
yeah, yeah, and I think that her reputation to this day is still absolutely tarnished as a result of the secret history, and you need to look past the surface to see this extraordinary human being
yes,
that she was, which is a shame. And this is another one that would make a phenomenal movie.
that's right.
My son.
Absolutely,
All
yeah,
three of these
absolutely,
would make great
Yeah.
dramas.
yeah. It's just incredible to think that she obviously advocated for women's rights very heavily, and yet even though she did all these things and she managed to change the world really for that world for women, um, what she's remembered for is the fact that she was an actress, which is
Yes.
associated with being a prostitute, and the horrible things that are written about her. And it just goes to show that the power that women hold and have held throughout history is is by and large seen as a threat. And when they held that power, a lot of the time the emphasis to try and reduce their power, the emphasis goes on their sexuality and on their body and on their this sort of seductive power that they have over men. They're going to lure them to them and use their body and their sexuality for bad things. And although it's maybe not necessarily quite like that now, the onus is still very much on, or the emphasis, sorry, is very much on women's bodies in general now, even to this day, in different ways, um, and not on the achievements that
Yes.
yeah, the things that they
Agreed.
do.
Yes, it's true, and it is still a modern problem, and in many ways, Theodora was an extraordinarily modern woman.
And she was a threat. She was a powerful, powerful woman.
Yes.
She wielded the authority of the emperor, and they empowered each other. So she was certainly a threat, and it's no wonder that she was treated so brutally later on. But
Yeah.
And it's another time where I sort of think to myself, okay, well, if you were to subvert this and all of the traits that she had, all of the achievements that she made, if they were done by a man, would they be framed as something like strength rather than something threatening? And it just makes you question how much of what we know about her is shaped by these hostile sources
Yes.
when these sources just seem invested in discrediting her.
agreed.
Yeah. She's just sort of like the perfect example of how history and storytelling really blur, where the actual person at the center of this almost kind of disappears. And what's left is this narrative that's built around.
What they represent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
She represents the change, the ending of the old order,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
these are
And to,
prominent fears at the time.
yeah, absolutely. And to try and link it to mythology a little bit, I think there's lots of there's so many women in mythology from all over the world that would fit this kind of narrative. And I would say, she's almost a bit like Cersei in how she's portrayed. She's powerful, but it's framed in a very dangerous way that says a lot about who's telling the story. And on my previous episode, I had a chat with Ayana, who is the author of I Medusa, and it's one of the things that we talked about was how women often become monstrous in the retelling of their stories, and that's I guess that's in Medusa stories in
Hmm.
general.
That's
Um,
right.
yeah, and I think what's really intriguing about Theodora is that we don't just inherit her life; we inherit all of these arguments about her, and that kind of tension feels again really close to lots of mythological stories where women sort of almost become battlegrounds for meaning rather than fully knowable individual people.
It's an existential argument.
Yeah, yeah. And I have one question for you guys before we wrap it all up. Um, and I guess we sort of answered it along the way, but I'm interested to hear an answer anyway. So, why do you think that Theodora's story became so polarized, and what made her such a target for this kind of storytelling, this kind of narrative spinning?
I don't know. She represented everything that Procopius hated, and to some extent, Justinian did as well. This idea of these new people, the swineherd, which is Justinian's uncle was a swineherd. He grew up on a little inconsequential farm in an inconsequential Roman province, and arrived in the capital, brilliant, but penniless and just kind of irrelevant. And Theodora stood on the hippodrome floor as a little girl and danced for the crowd.
And also, Constantinople at this time, like, it's totally Game of Thrones. I don't know what would be like an accurate comparison, but I mean, it's super brutal, super brutal. So, um, people are used to taking out their political rivals or doing character destroying campaigns and stuff like that. So, I think that it's a testament to her and Justinian, the fact that they lasted on the
They
throne for so
survived.
long.
Yes, so true.
They weren't taken down. There were no
And
plots.
they survived first and foremost because of her indomitable will.
That's right. And Justinian would go on to be the longest reigning emperor. So,
Yeah.
in a time of people would say the greatest extent of the Roman Empire, this was the peak of what they were able to achieve, and from there it would kind of go downhill. So, it's no wonder that such a remarkable woman was at the head of this all, I would say.
Yeah.
Wow, it's been so interesting to hear these three stories side to side because I think they each do show such different ways of how women navigated power in the ancient Roman world. And I think what really stands out to me is how much of what we have now and what we know now isn't just about the facts. It's about all of these narratives that were built around them by various people. And again, like I said, that feels really close to mythology in a lot of ways because it's different expressions of power. It's survival, it's legacy, it's narrative, which are three different ways that power can be sort of created and maintained. And yet all of them end up very slightly, or actually probably more than slightly, mythologized in how they're all remembered. And I think it, like I said earlier, it's that liminal space. It really shows how thin the line can be between history and myth.
Yes, for sure.
So
Most certainly.
yeah, before we wrap it all up, do you have any final thoughts on these women, on women in general in ancient Rome, or how we should be thinking about them today, or just anything else that you would like to leave listeners with?
Well, I think that, these three women, as much as we wish there were other examples we could have brought up,
Yes.
these three women are unfortunately the three biggest and most fleshed out examples that we have. So, you know, the women in ancient Rome and the ancient world certainly wielded great power and influence and did incredible things. And it's very hard for us to talk about it. Another great candidate is a woman named Hortensia, who there's almost just 4 lines written about her, but she comes across as a remarkable and very intuitive person. So it was a pleasure for us to do this, and we would like to do things like this again. And I would encourage more people to make the effort of taking the extra step to find out, what was life like
Yeah.
at this point in time. What were the men doing? What were the women doing? What was the everyday social aspect? It's important for us to understand, like you said, not the narrative, but what does the history actually represent? How was the world in this time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with you. And I'd say one last thing about you know women in the Roman world. We get these tantalizing glimpses of them. It's a line here. It's a bust there, and it requires effort. It really does. It requires an effort that it shouldn't to look past the big men, the emperors and the generals, to see the extraordinary influence of
And to read
Roman
between
women
the lines and not just,
and to read between the
assume
lines.
what they're telling us.
Yeah. The last thing, my last little bit to add is more a curiosity. It's one of the things that I find fascinating, which is right now in the Sinai Desert, there is a monastery that was built by Justinian, completed shortly after Theodora's death. It's called St. Catherine's Monastery. Its full name is the Holy Imperial Monastery of the God-trodden Mount Sinai. And Justinian built this thing around below what was supposed to be the biblical Mount Sinai, around the burning bush, of biblical fame. And every day the monks, because it's still an active monastic community, say a little prayer of thanks to Justinian and Theodora. So her name is still spoken with reverence in the Sinai Desert. I think it's pretty cool.
That is very, very cool. I think it's very hard to conceptualize the amount of time between then and now. Um, and for her name to still be spoken is very cool. It's incredible. I've absolutely loved this conversation. It's been so interesting. And just thank you so much for bringing these women to life. It's been honestly just a joy to explore them with you. I really appreciate you guys coming on.
Thank you. We've absolutely loved it. This was a thrill.
Thank you, India.
You are so very welcome. And thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Ladies of Law. And thank you again to Matthew and Matteo from the Lost Roman Heroes for coming along and telling us all of these stories about these incredible women of history. I will be making sure all of the links that you need to find their podcast on are in the show notes. So please do go and check it out because there's so much more to hear from them. And I'll be back next time to unravel another thread in the rich tapestry of women in mythology and folklore.